Hello, friends. I'm Elliot. Welcome back to my channel. And whether you're a writer, a reader, or a lover of words, I invite you to stop what you're doing and join me for a page break. Since the last time I came to you with a video, I've been working on a couple of really cool projects that I wanted to share with you. One of those is working on another thriller novel in my Ronan McCullough thriller series. I have two previous books in that series. One is called Fragile Brilliance. The second book in the series is called A Knife's Edge. And the third book that I'm working on is tentatively titled Double Crossed. So I've been working on that over the last month or so, trying to finish that novel up. I've got maybe 75,000 words finished. And so I'm coming close to the finish line. I'm coming sort of to the final few chapters, and I'm really excited to have that finished and wrapped up. In addition to that, I've also been working on a collection of short stories. I have a previous collection of short stories called Snapshots, which is a multi-genre level of or collection of short stories that came out in May of 2020, which was not always the best time because that was right around when COVID happened and the pandemic messed everything up and shut everything down. Well, I'm working on another collection of short stories, and I'm about halfway through that collection. Some of those stories have been already published in some literary journals and magazines, and so I'm kind of working on the back half of that collection. So how that affects me as a reader, and some of the things I wanted to talk about on this episode of Page Break, is what I've been reading lately. What have I been reading since the last time I talked to you? And we talked a little bit about quarters and how the year's divided up into quarters. Well, the second quarter of the year is getting ready to wrap up here at the end of June. And so I wanted to talk about what I've been reading and what I've loved since then. But when I'm writing and I'm reading, I oftentimes find myself reading the same genre that I'm writing in. And what I mean by that is if I'm working on my thriller novel, my next Ronan thriller novel, I tend to read a lot of thrillers while I'm working on that thriller novel. If I step away from that for a while and I'm working on my short story collections, oftentimes what I will do is read a lot of short story collections because that kind of gets me in the creative headspace and the creative place I need to be to work on that specific type of genre in my own writing. Now, I know some writers are different about that. Some writers feel differently about that. I know some writers are more along the lines of, I don't want to read the genre that I'm writing in. If I'm working on a romance novel, I don't want to read any romance novels. I want to read science fiction or biography or something like that. I am not that kind of a writer. If I'm writing something, if I'm working on a story or a book or a novel or whatever it may be, I want to read the genre that I'm writing in because it gives me inspiration. It sort of keeps my mind, where it needs to be in terms of the kind of genre I'm working on. So if you're a writer, I'd love to know, where do you fall in that category? Are you someone, when you're writing something, you don't mind reading other things in that genre, or do you have to be completely detached from what that is that you're working on and you want to read a genre that has nothing to do with the actual genre that you're writing? Let me know if you're a writer and you fall into one of those two camps. Leave a comment in the comments box below and let's have a discussion about that. Let's find out how many of us like to read what we're writing and how many of us want to stay away from the genre that we're reading when we're writing. I'd love to know your feedback and love to know your thoughts. So that leads me to what I've been reading lately, which has been a lot of mystery and thriller novels and some short story collections. And so I wanted to share with you some of the best things that I've read in the month of May, late April, early May, first part of June. And the first book I wanted to share with you today is by Chris Pavone, and it is called Two Nights in Lisbon. And if you've been in a bookstore recently, you might have seen this on the outward facing shelves close to the front door. If you've been in an independent bookstore recently, or even if you've been in a chain bookstore like Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, this was a terrific book. I absolutely love this book. I was not familiar with Chris Pavone prior to this book. I've heard his name mentioned. I've seen other books sold before, but this is a terrific story. I love this book. This book centers on a character, a woman named Ariel, who is in Lisbon, Portugal, and she has gone with her husband to Lisbon, Portugal, because he's on a business trip. Well, after the first night that they are in Lisbon, he ends up kidnapped. She wakes up the next morning in the hotel. He has disappeared. There's a cryptic note that she finds left under the bed, and he disappears and she can't find him. And what she finds as she kind of goes through the story and trying to find out what happens to him is that the police and the U.S. Embassy and people that are kind of involved in terms of law enforcement and places she could go to for help, being an American in a foreign country, are a little bit resistant to helping her. And so you find out why that is. But two things of this story that I really liked that I thought were really, really neat. One is we find those two reunited about halfway through the book. Sometimes in these kind of kidnapping stories, you don't find out until the very end if the person who's been kidnapped is even alive or dead or what kind of condition that they're in. Well, Chris doesn't do that in this particular book. In this book, they get reunited. Ariel and her husband, John, get reunited about midway through the book. And then you start to find out what happened. Why was he kidnapped? And what were the reasons for that? And one of the things you learn as the book unfolds is both Ariel and her husband have had lives before. They've been married before. They have had children with other people and connections, relationships with other people. And so you find out what brought them together. They haven't been married very long, and you find out why that is. And what you also learn is both Ariel and John had some very, very kind of shady associations and relationships prior to getting married. So I don't want to spoil it further than that. But this is a terrific book. I loved it. Again, I had not read anything by Chris before, but it was terrific, and I can't wait for his next read. The only thing I will point out about this book that might be a little bit disconcerting to some readers is there are multiple points of view within each chapter. As a reader, I kind of like that third person limited, where we can kind of head hop around and get inside different people's perspectives. And you get inside a lot of people's perspectives in this book. You're inside Ariel's perspective. You're inside some of the key players in the U.S. Embassy. You're inside the heads of some of the detectives investigating the kidnapping. So you get to bounce around to a lot of different people and get their perspectives. But oftentimes that happens multiple times in the same chapter. So you could be inside 3 different perspectives or 3 or 4 different characters' heads within one chapter. And sometimes that is distracting for readers, and sometimes readers don't like that. It doesn't bother me. I found it really neat and interesting to kind of get the same situation or the same conversation from multiple perspectives. But just know that if that kind of bothers you or distracts you as a writer, you're going to see that featured as part of his book. So again, if you like a good mystery and a good thriller, this is terrific. 2 Nights in Lisbon, Chris Pavone, highly recommend that one. The second mystery thriller that I've been reading is by another author I had never read before. And this book is called Welcome to Cooper. And the author of this book is Tariq Ashakani. And I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. And I'll just read you the blurb on the back, just so you can get a kind of a sense of what this book is about. It is set in a place called Cooper, Nebraska, which is sort of this forgettable and forgotten town, this forgettable and forgotten community that really nobody wants to move to, nobody wants to live in. And the only people that are really there are people that have some connection to there or can't leave for one reason or another. So as the summary says, it's a town you'd only stumble into if you'd taken a seriously wrong turn. Detective Thomas Levine's career has, but when a young woman is found lying in the snow, choked to death, her eyes gouged out, the disgraced detective is Cooper's only hope for restoring peace and justice. So we get to follow this really, really interesting detective, Thomas Levine, as he is back in Cooper, Nebraska, against his own will, against his own choice. He's been sort of sent back there, and I won't get into why that is, but really, really fascinating, really, really interesting story. I really, really liked Thomas Levine. He is a traditional detective in the sense that you might expect for a story like this, but he's got a lot of layers and a lot of nuance to him that really make him really, really interesting. And you find out that he suffered the brutal death of a girlfriend prior to him coming back to Cooper, Nebraska. So that weighs on him, and that kind of drives his motivation to find out what happened to this young girl who was murdered in Cooper, Nebraska. But this was a great book too. Again, I had not read anything by Tariq Ashakani before. This is a Thomas and Mercer book. So if you've read any of those books, those mystery thriller series from Thomas and Mercer, they have some characteristics that I like and that some readers like, and that the books are tight, they're taut, they move quickly. They're typically, 300 pages or less. In most cases, they're around 250, 260 pages. So the story moves quick, the pace is quick, the action is tense and brisk. And so if you've read Thomas and Mercer books before, you know that. If you've never read them before, that's just something that you'll expect and can expect to see every time you read one of those books. But I love this book. I loved Cooper, Nebraska, even though, or Welcome to Cooper and learning about Cooper, Nebraska, even though the pace of the book, it moves briskly and things happen pretty quickly in the story, you still get a sense of Cooper, Nebraska and why it is kind of this forgotten place. So this is a great book. I would recommend this book if you're traveling this summer, or you want a book that you're on a long plane flight, or you can read in the car, you're on a long car trip. This is one of those kind of books that you could read in a short amount of time and really, really enjoy. So I really, really enjoyed that book. I would highly recommend Welcome to Cooper. The other book that I read that was just fascinating to me, and this is another one maybe you've seen in bookstores if you've been there recently, it is called The Murder Rule, and this is by Dervla McTiernan. And this is another author that I was unfamiliar with and didn't know anything about, but I had seen this book advertised on social media. I'd seen this book come to my email inbox from Amazon as one of those books you need to add to your collection, the summer must read kind of story. And this was a terrific book. I absolutely loved this book. Again, this is by another author that I was not familiar with. I'd never read anything of her work before, but it's a terrific book. Don Winslow, if you've read any of his books, he called it diabolically clever and deeply moving. It is both of those things. It is really a compulsive psychological suspense story. If you've read Ruth Ware, if you have read Tanya French, this book kind of follows that style and that format. And the three kind of themes that happen in this book, I'll just read it right from the jacket cover. It says, first rule, make them like you. Second rule, make them need you. Third rule, make them pay. And here's just all that the dust jacket says about what this book is about. They think I'm young, idealistic, and a law student, that I'm passionate about reforming a corrupt and brutal system. They think I'm working hard to impress them. They think I'm here to save an innocent man on death row. They're wrong. I'm going to bury him. And so we learn about a particular character in this story who is a law school student, and she sort of takes an internship or a brief sort of program into working for this sort of civil rights organization. Her name is Hannah Rokeby, and she gets involved in this organization, sort of one of these nonprofit organizations that are trying to get this man off of death row, who they think has been wrongly put there. He's been wrongly convicted. He's been wrongly sentenced to death row. And so they go about trying to get him off of death row. And what you find is that Hannah has a connection to the inmate that's on death row, and she wants to make sure that he gets put to death. She wants to make sure that the conviction is not reversed and that they're not successful. This organization is not successful in getting his conviction overturned. This was fantastic. This was a great read. I loved Hannah as a character. At times I sympathized with what she was doing. At other times I was appalled at what she was doing, and I couldn't believe she was doing what she was doing. And I couldn't believe the people she worked with and worked for didn't understand and couldn't recognize what she was up to. But all of that, of course, makes for a great psychological suspense story, great thriller story. This was fantastic. I couldn't put it down. I read this in a day and a half once I got into it. I couldn't stop reading it. You've heard me mention in my previous recording or my previous episode here on the channel, I love fiction that teaches me things. And this is a book that teaches you about how these nonprofit kind of organizations that Hannah is working for, the steps they take and what they have to do to go about getting people like this criminal that they're trying to get off death row. What is that process like? How involved is that? What does it take to get all of that started, and what has to go on for that to happen? And so you kind of learn that process, which is something I didn't know anything about prior to reading this book, but I loved it. The Murder Rule, a great book, really interesting. You'll learn a lot about how that, getting wrongful convictions overturned kind of starts, but you're going to love Hannah. She's a great character. Again, at times I really was pleased with what she was doing, and I was kind of rooting for her, and other times I was appalled at what she was doing. So that's the mark of a great protagonist, right? When you sympathize with them sometimes, but you get frustrated with them as well. And then the next book I read is called over the last quarter that I really loved. It wasn't really the next book I read, but it's one of the books I wanted to mention today. Is by Sarah Petresky, and it is called Overboard. And this is a novel that is set around a character named V.I. Warshawski, who is a private investigator in Chicago. I think I've got everybody with odd last names in this episode, so I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly. If you're an author, or you are the author or the publisher or someone connected to this book, I apologize if I've butchered these names. But V.I. Warshawski is a private investigator in Chicago. She is looking for, in this particular book, she's uncovering and has uncovered a nefarious conspiracy that is preying on Chicago's weak and vulnerable citizens. And this is one of these things that really just kind of takes off from the very first page. VI is one of these people that reminds me a little bit of Easy Rollins from Walter Mosley, Easy Rollins's character in the Walter Mosley stories, because she operates, VI does, kind of on the fringes of law enforcement. She has connections inside the department in Chicago PD, but she's also got a lot of people inside the Chicago PD that do not like her, and they think she's a pest, and they've got plenty of evidence, and you'll find out when you read the book for why they think she's a pest and why she acts the way that she does, and why they don't get along with with her for different reasons. And so really, really interesting from that regard, in terms of kind of watching that. How does a private investigator work with a major police department like the Chicago Police Department that is layered in bureaucracy and layered in personality and layered in trying to solve crimes, vicious and brutal crimes over this large city. It's really, really interesting. So you learn a lot there. I really liked VI as a private investigator. She reminds me a little bit, as I said, of Easy Rollins, in that she gets herself into a lot of sticky situations, and she does things that she couldn't do if she was a true law enforcement officer or a true detective. But all that stuff that she does makes her that much more fascinating and interesting. My only problem with this book is that when I was reading it, I realized that this is another book in this series, and that there's like 7 or 8 books prior to this featuring V.I. Warshawski as a character. So I read this book. I loved it. I loved watching her kind of untangle the various threads that exist here. This is one of those thrillers, too, that has plots with inside plots with inside plots. So you really have to pay attention and follow all the threads. They do all come back together and tie together by the time you get to the end. But at times you feel like you're reading 3 different books at once. But I promise you, stay with it, stay on top of it, pay attention to what's going on. Sarah does a great job of tying everything back together at the end. But I do this all the time. I pick up books and I love them and I read them. And then after I'm 40 or 50 pages in, I realize, oh man, this is a book in a series. So now I'm going to do the responsible thing that any good reader should do. And now I'm going to go back and read the Warshawski series all the way from the beginning up to this point, so that I can figure out how we got there, and I can learn a little bit more about VI's background and how she got to this point as a private investigator. Are you someone that does that? I just do this all the time, not just with mysteries and thrillers, but it seems like anytime I pick up a book, I would say 1 out of 5 times of me picking up a book to read at a bookstore, particularly if it's by an author I'm not familiar with or something that I don't have a connection to previously, I always pick up the 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th book in the series. And then I'm like, well, crap, now I've got to go back and I've got to go all the way back and read all the way up to this point so I can figure out how we got here. So that's my fault, but it's also a great challenge as well as a reader, because then you have to go back and read all of that. So if you're one of those people that seems to always fall into a great character or a new series right in the middle of the series, you can also drop a comment in the comments box, and let's talk about that. What's a series that you've fallen into midway through that you had to go back and read to get all the way caught up before you kept going forward? I'd love to know. Maybe we could have a conversation about some good series, book series that are out there that maybe somebody would like to read, or somebody would like to start from the beginning to the end. But so I fell into this book midway through the VI character and through the VI series, but this is terrific. Overboard, a great book. Really, really liked it. I would highly recommend it. But again, just remember that you're kind of got 3 stories going at once, or 3 distinct plot lines moving at the same time. But I promise you, stick with it. It'll be worth it at the end. Sarah does a great job of tying it all together at the end. So it's highly worth your time and your effort. Excuse me. I mentioned that I've been working on some short stories and short story collection. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about one book of short stories that I really loved. This is by an Irish author, Colin Barrett, and the title of this book is called Homesickness. This is a collection of stories by him, and this is his second book, in a second published book for Colin. And he is Irish, and many of the stories that are featured here take place in Ireland, and they're very Irish and very British. So there's a lot of vernacular, a lot of pejoratives, a lot of descriptions and things that are very Irish and very British in terms of how characters talk to each other and what they call things, like calling cell phones mobiles, for example. If you're familiar with that, if you know anything about British culture, they tend to call things differently than we call them here in the United States, but that gives it charm, and that gives it I think a strong sense of place. You really feel like you're in Ireland. There's 8 stories in this collection. I really like that because I feel like we get a chance to really spend a lot of time within each short story. We really get a chance to get connected to the place, connected to the characters, connected to what's going on in this particular set of stories. Sometimes I feel like when I read short story collections that have 13, 14 stories in them, I feel like just when I kind of get engrossed and really into the story, it's over and I'm on to the next story. But here, with only 8 stories to follow, you really get immersed into each individual story. And without giving too much away to this book, I basically will just say that If you like character-driven stories, and if you like stories that sort of follow the lives of outcasts and misfits and miscreants and people that are outside of the norm and kind of on the fringes of society, then you're going to love Colin Barrett's collection, because all of the characters in this story, both the main characters, the antagonists, and the supporting characters, all kind of fall into those categories of people. And so it's really great to see them all interact. It's really great to see the conversations that take place. I love the dialogue in this. I thought the dialogue was so accurate and so true to what people would say to one another, even with the Irish British kind of acronyms put in there and sayings put in there. I thought this was a very true dialogue, and it was very, very real in terms of how people would speak to each other. And it's something I really, really enjoyed. So if you're looking for a good collection of short stories for your reading this month or this summer, I would highly recommend Homesickness by Colin Barrett. And then I would be also remiss if I didn't say I've been reading other things besides mysteries and thrillers and short stories. I have been doing a lot of that. But one book that I really loved, which was kind of a romantic comedy, was called Birds of California. And this is a book that was written by Katie Catugno, I believe is how I pronounce her last name, Katie Catugno. Again, another author I had not really read anything about. I found this at Barnes & Noble. This was, I believe, one of Barnes & Noble's picks earlier this spring, one of their picks of the month earlier this spring. And this is really a great story because it follows a former child actor named Fiona St. James, who is sort of recovering. She was a child star that was famous on a television show, a soap opera called Birds of California. And she hasn't really been doing a whole lot. She's been kind of jaded from acting in Hollywood since then. But now a production company out in Hollywood, out in Los Angeles, wants to revive and do an updated sort of, not really a reboot, but kind of a forward in time continuation of the series. And that's where, or the soap opera, and that's where the title Birds of California comes from. And throughout this time, she meets another character named Sam Fox. And Sam Fox played her older brother on the television series the first time it was around. And so he certainly has grown up. She's grown up. And he tries to get her and convince her that it's worth coming back and firing up the Birds of California show again for another run. She doesn't want to do it for a variety of different reasons that you'll learn when you read the book. He wants to do it for a variety of reasons that are different than hers that you'll learn when you read the book. But I just love this. I love the chemistry that Fiona and Sam had together. It was sweet, it was romantic, but it wasn't erotic, and it wasn't sappy. It just hit that sweet spot between playful but romantic. And I love the interplay that the two characters had. They play off of each other so well. You meet some other great characters as well. You meet some of Sam's friends who are really quirky and great. You meet Fiona's mother and her daughter, who she spends a lot of time with since the soap opera show ended. And they're great characters. And I just love all the dynamics that all the characters have. And everybody is rooting for Fiona and Sam to get together romantically. And everybody is for that. And everybody sees that there's chemistry there except Fiona. So she's resistant and keeps fighting back her attraction to him all the way through up until the end. And there's a lot more surprises in there as well. But I love this. I don't read a lot of rom-coms or romantic comedies very often, but this book caught my attention. I absolutely loved it. It moves quick, really sharp dialogue. I love the chemistry between these two characters. And again, it hits that sweet spot between being romantic, but not erotic, but also not kind of cheesy and silly. So Kate's done a great job of hitting just right in the middle, where there's just enough romance to keep it interesting, but there's so many other dynamics in play between Fiona and Sam's relationship that you really want to see where all this is going to go and what's going to happen to both of them at the end. So I would highly recommend Birds of California if you're looking for a romantic comedy to read this summer. So that's what I've really been reading that I loved, absolutely loved over the last 6 or 7 weeks or so. I've had a lot of other things that I've been reading that I just don't have time to mention today, but those were some of my favorites. So if you're looking to expand your early summer, late spring reading list, if you're thinking about going on vacation, you want to sit on the beach for a long time and read a lot of books under the umbrella with the waves kind of crashing up against your feet. Oh gosh, doesn't that sound wonderful? Then those are some books I would highly recommend that you take with you on your trip. You'll really, really enjoy it. I think you'll find these to be some really good mysteries and thrillers that'll keep you turning the pages. And I think Colin's short story collection and also Kate's book, Birds of California, will really keep you satisfied and interested on your reading journeys going forward. So I'm really excited about what I've got coming up on the next couple of episodes for you here on the channel. I've got some author interviews coming up that you're going to love, and we're going to go to some book festivals this summer. I can't wait to take you to some book festivals this summer, talk about book festivals, where they are, what they are, why they're important, why, if you're an author, you should consider going to one, and why, if you're a writer, you should consider going to one, and if you're a reader, why you should consider going to book festivals, and kind of how all those three groups mix and mingle together at book festivals to make them the fun and great events that they are. So I appreciate you watching. Thanks for tuning in. Please leave a comment on the comments boxes below. All of my social media tags are over here on the right side of the screen. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I'd love to hear from you there. So feel free to reach out at any time. Let me know what you're reading. What do you like? What have you not liked recently? Are you going to any book festivals this summer? If so, where? What are you looking forward to? Who's coming to speak? Let's have a great conversation about books and writing and reading and what we've been up to recently. So thanks so much for checking out this episode of the channel, and I will see you next time.